Senate Republicans, if you will, that they may want to go down this road of witnesses. Now, to me, if the sole power to impeach, that power constitutionally is the House of Representatives, not the Senate's. They impeached him. They said it's a slam dunk case. They have now presented their case. The president's putting up his defense. It'll be 16 hours of questions. Now, then they'll debate the issue of whether or not they're going to have witnesses. Why would any Senate Republican vote to bring any other witness but those that were brought up in the House? Impeachment. Why are you going to bring in other people now? Why are you going to take on the constitutional role of the House? That's not your authority.
You're right. That's not their role. And if they make these comments after the day, I don't know how they can make the comments. You always wondered how they cheated in the House side. But Adam Schiff never allowed the president's attorney inside the room. Today showed you why. His case has no facts. It doesn't hold. Even through all the lies that Adam Schiff has said, it was blown apart today. So there's somebody in the Senate that thinks they need to call a witness, that they think they need to call a witness. In the House, they did not even subpoena him. And it doesn't even matter what the New York Times allegedly says happened. You have the transcripts. You were right. It goes beyond those 4 facts. Those 5 facts never changed. You have all the facts you need. This does not hold ground. The American public wants us to move on and actually do the work we're supposed to be doing that we watch this president doing every single day.
Are you talking to any Republican senators? And if you are, what's the consensus?
You know, I was with quite a few of them this weekend, and the consensus of what they had were Adam Schiff, they knew he was lying, but when he said put their head on a post and used that anonymous name, it infuriated them. Most of them all told me that it would be over this week. But to wake up and to hear Mitt Romney say that he needs to hear from Bolton because the New York Times said something, you have the transcript. You don't need anything more. And to stop for one moment. The president did nothing wrong. Ukraine got the money. Ukraine did nothing for the money. And pause for one moment. What did Barack Obama give him? Blankets. Our president gave him Javelin. I just don't understand why anybody would think it's their role in the Senate to try to do something more to this case. You know, Congressman Nadler said it inside the House when we voted on this, that they proved it beyond a shadow of a doubt. So why do they need anything more? That's their case. They testified. The president only now, when no other president has been held this way, has his legal team going forward. And I think they made a very strong case today while this needs to be shut down and get back to the Americans' business.
Let's assume that they want to bring in other witnesses for a second, which I think is ridiculous at this point. You're right. They said this was a slam dunk case. They had this thing all wrapped up. They voted for their impeachment. They got their impeachment. They now got their 24 hours. Now the president's defending. Then they're going to have 16 hours of questions. Okay. Why would you bring in John Bolton? Already we have the president contradicting him. A. Mick Mulvaney. B. Then you have the DOJ. C. So, okay, what would that mean? Conflicting testimony. What would that be in a court of law? That would be a wash, wouldn't it?
Yep, exactly. I don't understand how they think they need to have somebody else. You have all the facts you need right now. You should get back to the American business. Think of this. Inside the House, Chairman Nadler's the head of the Judiciary Committee. They are more excited about trying to remove the president than trying to remove fentanyl. We have a bill there that could do just that. The American public wants us working like President Trump has been working. I don't understand. It's not the role of the Senate to bring any witnesses in. There's no need. The House, they took a vote. They said they had everything they need. They never subpoenaed Bolton. You have everybody else saying this did not take place. I think the American public wants us to.
I do think if you're going to go down this road of witnesses that were not called in the House, then you got to bring in Schiff. You got to bring in the hearsay whistleblower, who apparently 2 weeks into the Trump administration was talking to others, according to a report, about how do we remove Trump. So you got Schiff. And then I think you got to bring in Joe, and you got to bring in Hunter. Because if the president, by hearing the tape of Joe bragging, we just had the 2-year anniversary of this, hearing that his son had zero experience being paid millions and taxpayer dollars being used to shake down another country so a family member can make more millions, I would argue that the president was well, not only within his rights, he took a sworn oath to uphold the laws of the land, and it would sound to me like he was doing just that.
The president believes in accountability. We've watched him from his own business sense. He's not just going to send American tax dollars out there without making sure they're being held accountable. But you are correct, Sean. You know what we have not seen? We've never seen that 18th witness, the Inspector General. Why? because we all know that it would prove that Adam Schiff was a fact witness. Remember, Adam Schiff started all this through his lies, but he also said he was so afraid the whistleblower couldn't testify. The only reason why this whistleblower has not testified is because Adam Schiff has protected him, because he lied and he met with him. The thing that we have to see moving forward, Adam Schiff should have to testify as a fact witness, but I don't think we need this. The question before us is, should the president be impeached? And you were right, no Republican voted that way, but also bipartisan vote inside the House said no, the president should not be impeached. There's no more witnesses that have to go forward. You have the transcript. Money was sent to Ukraine. Ukraine did nothing to get the money sent to them, and they didn't even know the money was being held up until the political story. What more do you need than all those facts? No other president has given the transcripts, and if you do go to witnesses,
the main fact
they have to be deposed. It's going to go on forever.
They got the money. They didn't get any promises. They didn't get any investigations. They didn't do a thing. They didn't even know they were supposed to do a thing. Amazing. Congressman, thank you. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, even top Democrats, they're starting to realize impeachment is a big flop with the voters. I was a little shocked even myself. Listen to former Obama senior advisor David Axelrod. Pretty revealing moment.
I was in a focus group this morning for the Institute of Politics here at the University of Chicago with some Chicago Democratic voters, and it was chilling to hear them talk about this because impeachment didn't even come up. No one volunteered it for 80 minutes into the focus group, and you know, we're right in the middle of the trial. When it came up, they said, you know, it's terrible what he did. The case has been proven, but we know how it's going to turn out, so we're not really that interested. We're ready to move on.
Well, they have a pretty fair interpretation. Here with the reaction, Louisiana Congressman Mike Johnson and Florida Congressman Michael Gates. Congressman Johnson, a member of the president's impeachment team. Mr. Congressman Johnson, we'll start with you. Your take. I actually think this was a beatdown. It was a systematic, they ripped this case apart, top to bottom, sideways and every way in between, and they had a great team doing it.
I'm so proud of this legal defense team. I've litigated cases in federal court for 20 years before I got to Congress. I've never seen a team work so efficiently and effectively. Almost no one is watching this anymore. As that previous clip indicated, most of America has tuned out. And the only bad thing about that, Sean, is that they're not seeing how we're systematically and utterly destroying the House manager's case. They brought nothing to the table. We've shown that pretty clearly. And at the end of this, I think the Senate's going to find that conclusively.
Well, I think you're probably right there, too. And let me go, if I can, Michael Waltz, your take watching all of this unfold today.
Yeah, Sean, I was just down in my district, and I just can't overemphasize. People are tuning this out. They've had enough. The Democrats have been crying wolf for 3 years now. They want us to get back to real issues. This is a bunch of politicians fighting with each other. But meanwhile, in the House, this coming week, as rockets are falling on our embassy in Baghdad, the House is going to move to tie the president's hands, repeal the authorization of the use of military force, prevent him from continuing to respond and deter Iran. Look, he needs to, just this week alone, he is going to continue to put points on the board. We have a Middle East peace deal being announced tomorrow. We have USMCA being signed this week. And when that Dow crosses 30,000, that's what people care about back home. They care about immigration, health care, prescription drugs, things that affect their lives. Not all of this fighting up in D.C.
Yeah, I thought Professor Dershowitz in particular on the constitutionality of this could not have been more spot on. What is the crime, Congressman Johnson? Tell me.
There is none, and he made the point very effectively. The only two previous impeachments, the examples we have in history from Andrew Johnson in 1868 to Bill Clinton in the late 90s, you had specific crimes that were committed and a ton of evidence verifying that. They haven't alleged any crime at all here, and they never met the threshold. The Democrats never met the threshold for an impeachment. That's the first question the Senate has to answer, and when they do, it moots everything else. All this debate about witnesses and documents and all the rest is totally unnecessary because they never sent over valid articles of impeachment. And the scary thing is, Sean, the biggest point that Professor Dershowitz made and others, and we've been saying for weeks, is they've opened a Pandora's box. They have now put the bar for impeachment so low that every future president will have to be looking over their shoulder. If a majority in the House is from a different party, the base is going to demand that they take that president out. This is exactly what the Founding Fathers feared. And here we go.
Congressman Waltz, I mean, okay, so if that's the case, how do they bifurcate their brains and compartmentalize away Joe and Hunter? Hunter making millions, no experience, Joe shaking down Ukraine with our money. Oh, that's perfectly fine. I'm like,
yeah, and also, you know, I want to get to the bottom of how $1 billion came into Hunter Biden's company from the Central Bank of China, from our rival, from our enemy. Look, I just can't overemphasize talking to people, between Corey Lewandowski and Cohen, and we've got this person, we've got that person. Now they're claiming Bolton. People have really tuned this out. I talked to some local anchors in Florida. Their ratings were tanking trying to cover this thing. I really think this is a fizzle at best. But meanwhile, the president is getting things done. He is putting points on the board, and we're going to move the country forward, despite all of this.
Thank you both, Congressman. We appreciate it. Meanwhile, serious questions continue to be raised about, yes, zero experience Hunter, who today, by the way, agreed to finally pay monthly child support in his Arkansas paternity case, ending that standoff with the courts over possibly being held in contempt. Here with reaction, Fox News contributor Dan Bongino, nationally syndicated radio host Larry Elder. I wonder if he finally made the agreement, Dan, because the judge was demanding that he have to hand over his financial information, but I would think still that's a likelihood, no?
Oh, absolutely. And wouldn't we love to see those financial records, Sean? I mean, listen, he had a lucrative board position on a company, as we know, in Ukraine that was dealing in natural gas, despite not speaking Ukrainian, having no experience in the region, and having nothing to do with natural gas at all. And, you know, Sean, one thing I heard a reporter say today, because I can see they're trying to flip the narrative because the media's just been gross on this story and pathetic, said something to the effect that Ted Cruz, like, you know what, this is all about just a guy getting using his connections to get a job. No, that's not what this is about. This is about the son of the vice president going to work for a company that was under an investigation, and the vice president demanding the guy investigating him be fired. That's what this is about. Don't try to fake it and turn it into something else.
Larry, look, you and I, you're a libertarian, I'm a conservative, and I think we just believe in equal application of standards. You know, just fundamental fairness. The breathtaking hypocrisy that every Democrat, everybody in the media has to take on, that they ignore Joe and Hunter. How do they pull that off? Because I don't think my brain would allow me to go that stupid.
It's called double standard, Sean. You know that. And even worse is his new book by Peter Schweizer. I know you had him on as his first interview. He alleges not just Hunter. He says there are 5 family members that benefited from Joe being vice president. That is very, very serious. From a political standpoint, arguably that's even more serious than this paternity lawsuit. The paternity lawsuit he was hiding the ball because he probably didn't want people to know how much money he was getting from
Let me ask you this.
But it's going to come out sooner or later.
We have Peter Schweizer's book, Larry, so then let me ask you this. Okay. Right. Maybe a few weak Republican senators, we need more witnesses. They did such a horribly poor job. We'll take on the constitutional role of the House, even though it's their sole power to impeach. Well, then you got to bring in Hunter. You got to bring in Joe. You got to bring in the congenital liar. You got to bring in the hearsay whistleblower. Right. What's fair would be fair. Get to the bottom of all of this. How do you think that vote goes down?
The Democrats won't go along with that. They don't want Joe to testify. They don't want Hunter to testify. And they most certainly don't want Adam Schiff to testify about his contact with the whistleblower before the whistleblower even went to the IG. So it's not a deal. It's not a deal that they're going to accept.
So do they do it all at once?
I agree with Kevin McCarthy. Yeah. There ought not be any witnesses. They should have put on the witnesses on the House level. But it doesn't really matter because Maxine Waters already said she's going to continue, so there'll be a subpoena for Joe Biden, for John Bolton either way. Ultimately, it will be resolved in the courts as to whether or not executive privilege will prevent him from testifying under oath. But if he wants to write a book, have a press conference, tell people what he saw, he can do that now.
They can either put all the witnesses into one vote, Dan, but you know what? First, all right, should we call Adam Schiff? Let's call the roll. Democrats all vote no. Hunter, no. Joe, no. The hearsay non-whistleblower, no. Republicans are going to watch that and then say, bring in John Bolton?
Yeah, but here's the problem, Sean. We got a bunch of chump, weak-kneed Republicans up there. That's the problem. We got a bunch of good guys, but we got this small crew. You know, we got Mittens out there and other ones leading the charge. You know, Mittens, this guy loves anyone who will hurt the president. It's an embarrassment.
All right, guys, good to see you both. When we come back, all right, Iowa caucuses are 1 week from tonight. 2020 Democrats, gloves are off, and looks like a surge of Bernie Sanders at the last minute. Karl Rove, he'll handicap that race. Straight ahead.
Fox News, I'm Roger Stern. President Trump's impeachment trial largely ignored the topic of former National Security Advisor John Bolton. This despite reports that his new book will largely corroborate Democrats' arguments that the president tried to pressure Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and his son. The topic coming up only once in yesterday's Senate trial.
Nothing in the Bolton revelations, even if true, would rise to the level of an abuse of power or an impeachable offense.
Defense attorney Alan Dershowitz. Americans remain trapped in China because of travel restrictions related to the coronavirus. But Fox's Simon Owen says help is on the way.
The U.S. chartering a flight to take maybe several hundred Americans out of Wuhan, China, the city where the outbreak first emerged.
They will be screened when they arrive here in the U.S. America is listening to Fox News.
In place, not everyone is convinced.
What comes to my mind is the possibility of frightening privacy invasion by the government.
Denver attorney and privacy advocate Dan Recht says this could clear the way for an invasive national database. Gemalto assures the information stays with individual states, but critics caution safeguards in place now could be whittled away later.
What keeps the government from overreaching? What keeps them from going the next step, and it really is only another step or two, to a national ID where they know everything about you?
And unlike your plastic driver's license, you can restrict the information to the situation. When shopping at a liquor store, the app will only show your photo and whether you can legally buy alcohol.
I think it's a great idea, especially in a store where we have thousands of transactions a day. The speed of getting the customer through the checkouts is imperative.
Consumer appetite for increased convenience could trump concerns, especially with the prospect of fewer DMV lines and a driver's license that can be updated remotely. The pilot program has another year to go. Then it will be up to the individual states to decide how or if to roll out these digital credentials. In Denver, Alicia Acuna, Fox News.
Thanks for watching Fox Extra. I'm Laura Ingle. Keep it right here.
I can promise you, if I could take every human being with me for 5 minutes, stand them next to me on the surface of the moon, and look back at the Earth, the world might very well be a better place to live in today. There's no question in my mind that there is a creator of the universe.
I guess no atheist in space, that once you're exposed and see what you see.
This is not two dust particles that came together, created massive energy, and eventually life. It's just inconceivable.
On December 14, 1972, after collecting almost 250 pounds of lunar samples, the most of any crew, the mission was over.
I started up the ladder, and I looked down at my final footprint, and I knew I wasn't coming back this way. And I looked up there at the Earth, the multicolored blues of the oceans and whites and the snow and the clouds, not tumbling through space, but with purpose and an order, turning on an axis. So I started up the ladder, and I was looking for that proverbial freeze button, because I wanted to keep this moment going for a while.
American challenge of today has forged man's destiny of tomorrow.
You were the last human being to touch that surface. How does that make you feel?
Humble.
From tonight, the Iowa caucuses take place, and the new extreme radical socialist Democratic Party, they're continuing to double down on, their economy-killing far-left agenda. 94 trillion new Green Deal, 52 trillion Medicare for all, no private health insurance. And you got Comrade Bernie Sanders actually admitting he doesn't even know how much his socialist plan will cost you, we, the American people. Medicare for all we can't even afford. That's with no defense. Take a look.
Your agenda has promised free health care for everybody, free college tuition, and to pay off people's college loans. The price tag for that is estimated to be $60 trillion over 10 years, correct?
Well, look, we have political opponents.
You don't know? You don't know how much your plan costs?
You don't know. Nobody knows. This is impossible.
You're going to propose a plan to the American people and you're going to tell them how much it costs?
94 trillion new Green Deal, 52 trillion Medicare for all. By the way, we only take in $4 trillion a year. Do the math. Will somebody maybe give them an abacus or a calculator or something? And what Bernie's proposing would send the country into poverty almost instantaneously. And good luck getting rid of the lifeblood of our economy and the world's economy, oil and gas. Shockingly, Democrats, they don't seem to care. Elizabeth Warren, his challenger, by the way, who despite getting the endorsement from the Des Moines Register, finds her campaign in an all-out collapse just ahead in Iowa, setting up what looks like a battle between Sanders and quid pro quo Joe Biden, who's telling supporters that Bernie's agenda scares the heck out of people. Take a look.
You know, I show how I pay for everything in my campaign. Others out there propose they're going to spend $60 trillion over the next 10 years. $60 trillion. More than doubling all the federal spending with an explanation that they'll tell you how we're going to pay for it later. But we don't know how they're going to pay for it. I don't think you win votes by doing that. I think it scares the living devil out of people.
Sort of like promising, keep your doctor, keep your plan, and you're going to save on average $2,500 per family per year. Oh, millions lost their doctors, millions lost their plans. 40% of the country has one Obamacare exchange option, and on average, everyone's health care went up a whopping 174%. That was Joe and Obama's promise. This is even worse. Here with reaction, former Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Fox News contributor Carl Rowe. Now, Carl, we run the animation again. We made this just for you. This is Rowe's whiteboard segment because, and I want to know, we have to get you new whiteboards if we roll that. How many whiteboards did you bring tonight?
I got two, and they're my whiteboards. You didn't give me anything. I mean,
I did so.
We're living in a world with free things and free everything from Bernie, at least from you, Sean. Can I get some free whiteboards, please?
I just ran it again. I have an animation. Okay, how many whiteboards would you like for this year? Tell me. You got it. 2?
Well,
I'm going to give you 3.
Person. No. Look. If I have to beg for you for it, it's not worth it. I'm a self-reliant guy. I got my own whiteboards. So let's just move on to the numbers, and we'll pass over the fact that my birthday and Christmas came in December, same day, and you didn't bother to send me a whiteboard. Don't worry about it, though. My feelings aren't hurt.
I'm sending you 4 tomorrow.
There we go.
What's going on
Iowa. Well, Iowa, 1 week away, and this is the Real Clear Politics average, and what it shows is Bernie has been moving up, Warren and Buttigieg have been moving down. Today, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, there were 4 candidates who are 15% or above. Remember, that's the magic threshold to get delegates, is 15%. Today, we got 3 above. Warren has now fallen underneath 15%. She may get above that by Election Day because she's got a good organization there. But Klobuchar has moved up as well. She might actually, in some parts of the state, get above 15% and get some delegates. But this is the story. Sanders moving up, Warren moving down. Biden sort of hanging there, but he's now in second place. He's been in first place for much of the last couple of months.
Let's take a look after Iowa, right behind it, the New Hampshire primary. What do you got for that?
Well, New Hampshire, it's, again, a Real Clear Politics average, and the same story there. Warren dropping. Remember, she's from a neighboring state, as is Bernie. Bernie at 24, Biden at 16. Buttigieg right on the bubble, 14.8 in the Real Clear Politics average. And Warren, who was earlier above 20, is now at 13. Klobuchar, who's gotten the endorsement of the New York Times with Warren, is there at 7. But again, the magic number is 15. Warren is in danger of falling below the 15%. Now, the good news for Warren is that if Sanders wins Iowa, is not necessarily a guarantee of him doing well in New Hampshire, because New Hampshire likes to do something different than than Iowa's done. So there's 6 days, but there's a lot of 8 days, but there's a lot of difference that can take place between the Monday that they vote in Iowa and the Tuesday that after the week following when they vote in New Hampshire.
All right,
but
so
today,
let's look beyond. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Carl.
Yeah, but today, we're looking at Sanders coming out of the first 2 with good numbers. Now it begins to change in Nevada, and it begins and changes a lot in South Carolina. And the Real Clear Politics average today, Biden is ahead in Nevada at 25 to Bernie's 19.3, and in South Carolina, in the Real Clear Politics average, Biden is ahead 32 to Sanders 15. So we may have somebody who wins the first 2, and we may have somebody different who wins the next.
All right, let me ask this: so when we get to South Carolina, then we head to Super Tuesday. Will Iowa, New Hampshire matter?
Yeah, what matters is how people, do they beat expectations and how do they handle those? What's their message coming out of that? And we saw what Biden is going to be saying, which is, in essence, Bernie is too scary. Bernie is so far out there that he's not going to be able to beat Trump because Trump's going to be able to say, this guy's going to take everything you got and more and plunge the country into a big deficit in order to pay for these high-cost promises that he's making.
You were the first that I read predicting a possible brokered convention. Let's see if we head down that road. Karl Rove, whiteboard. I'm sending them. It's in the mail. They're coming. All right. A lot of people worried about the coronavirus. What's happening? You close down Disney, close down movie theaters, you're building hospitals. Now the U.S. is advising its citizens to reconsider traveling to China. Probably good advice. Trace Gallagher has a report. Later, we have breaking details on what caused the helicopter crash that killed the great, talented Kobe Bryant. Straight ahead.
Should Bolton withdraw his book? His former chief of staff says yes. Now, A speaks out on the leaked manuscript and why his former boss should retract it. The exclusive interview on the Ingram Angle.
German military intelligence broke a U.S. naval code and knew all about the secret meeting. Hitler, the story went, had signed off on Operation Long Jump, in which dozens of German paratroopers would drop into Iran wearing Red Army uniforms and pose as part of Stalin's security team.
Different assassins that have parachuted into Tehran with the intent of assassinating these three world leaders. The Russians say they've captured a great number of them, and they've extracted information from them, but they haven't captured all of them.
Claiming he was still in danger, Stalin implored Roosevelt to stay at the Soviet embassy, offering him extra protection. William Harriman, the American ambassador to the Soviet Union, was skeptical.
So there are some who believe that the assassin's story was a ploy to bring him inside the embassy grounds. I think it was real. I think they were concerned, and they made the right move. They moved him into the embassy.
From Roosevelt's perspective, this is good news. He wants to spend time alone with Stalin. That's his goal. He is particularly determined to show Stalin that he has an independent relationship with him, that this is not going to be maneuvered through Churchill. It's about schmoozing Stalin, and it's about gaining trust.
But FDR also ran the risk of undermining his relationship with his friend Churchill.
It's not that he's going to throw Churchill out. He understands that Britain is very important. He understands that Churchill is important. But in a sense, that relationship is rock solid. He doesn't need to worry about it. Now he's moving beyond that relationship to a direct one-on-one with Stalin.
Of course, Stalin and his intelligence officers angled for every edge they could get.
As soon as they knew that Roosevelt was coming, they bugged every room in the future Roosevelt residence inside the Tehran embassy.
There's a memo here in the FDR library from William Bridgeton, who's a naval aide to the president, that basically orders everybody that if you're going to speak about things secret, you should go outside. They anticipated there would be espionage.
As for Churchill, he rejected advice to keep his cards close to the vest.
And certainly people around Churchill were aware of the risks and had to constantly remind him of these risks. He tended, I think, not to ignore them, but to play up to them. On being told that a room was being bugged, his normal response would be to say very derogatory things in a very loud voice.
Once Roosevelt was settled, Stalin appeared at his door.
Stalin was used to being able to rule without opinions, without anybody's advice. And when he got to Tehran, he was that kind of person. He was a bit impatient. He wanted decisions to be made rather rapidly. On that very first day, when he walked in and met Roosevelt, he said, let's start right now.
Inevitably, Churchill was worried at Tehran when Roosevelt seemed to be excluding Churchill. It was inevitable that was going to lead to worries within the British camp. What were they talking about? What were they discussing? What are they not telling us?
In the early hours of May 15th, 1918, Henry Johnson became a legend.
As many as 24 Germans attempting to capture Henry and Needham.
Henry fired back until his rifle was empty.
Henry jumped on top of this German, plunged a bolo knife through the top of his skull. Many considered Henry Johnson to be the greatest American hero of the war.
It's Fox Fox News alert, the deadly coronavirus, which originated in China, has now spread to the U.S. Here now live from our West Coast newsroom tonight with the very latest, Trace Gallagher. Trace.
And Sean, just to get the numbers straight without alarming anyone, there are currently 5 confirmed cases of coronavirus in the U.S., but the CDC now says 110 cases are under investigation in 26 states. That number is likely to rise. The 5 confirmed cases are among those who recently traveled to Wuhan, China. And clearly this is a fluid situation. For example, the Chinese National Health Minister now says the virus is more easily transmitted than previously thought, and that it might be contagious during the incubation period. So far in China, the virus has sickened more than 2,700 people and killed 100. Wuhan, with a population of 11 million, is currently under lockdown, but some experts think that's making things worse, saying there's no evidence quarantines actually work, and that shutting down a city makes the distribution of food and medical care a huge challenge. Even those who support quarantine say this one might have been too late. And we should emphasize, finally, the CDC says the risk to the general American public remains low. Sean.
All right, Trace Gallagher, thank you. Joining us now, Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci is with us. Dr. Fauci, good to see you. I've watched you over the many decades, and I know this is your wheelhouse. This is what you do. I would agree with Trace's analysis. Okay, maybe we're looking at 110 cases, only 5 confirmed. I feel China reacted too slowly. Contact tracing, incubation periods. Have we gotten that tied down yet?
Yeah, what likely happened was that the first person that was infected was not really recognized, and there was a period of time when there was a spread of infection, and then they saw a cluster of cases which they had essentially assigned to this fish market, this wild animal market, and felt that that was where the infections came from, when actually it was probably percolating for at least a few weeks before. And now we have a situation where we really have widespread throughout all of China. I mean, it's still focused in Wuhan, which is the epicenter, but essentially all 30 of the provinces have cases, all traveling from Wuhan. Same thing in the United States. It's not surprising at all that we have 5 travel-related cases. Fortunately, we were able to handle them appropriately by identifying them, isolating them, and doing contact tracing. So the report that we heard is correct. It is a low risk, but the situation in China is very, very mobile in the sense of it's evolving. It's not a static situation. So it could get much worse.
Let's assume for a second that you're right, and I've watched you for so long, and I know this is what you do. So my question is, what if it is worse? Is this a moment where maybe countries put politics aside, a little bit of pride aside, and do we have U.S. officials, should U.S. professionals such as yourself get involved and help them out in this to try and contain this?
Well, you know, Sean, you bring up a really important point. I feel that the data that are coming out of China, particularly the last thing that your reporter said, that the Chinese are saying that it can be spread during a period when a person doesn't have symptoms, that has huge implications about the policies that we take here in the United States, how we're going to do screening. So that's based on a statement from a Chinese official. I would like to see our CDC. Yeah, I'd like to see us get there and look at the data firsthand.
All right, and it would be, and we're prepared here real quick.
Yeah, we are prepared. In fact, if you look at the way we handled the 5 cases that came in, they were very appropriately and correctly handled.
All right, Dr. Anthony Fauci, thank you so much for being with us. When we come back, details what caused Kobe Bryant and his helicopter crash and tragedy over the weekend. Straight ahead.
I guess the first thing that I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about is sort of the post-American Sniper, American Wife part of your life, because all of it, Chris's death, obviously so fresh at that time in your life, and it was such a big story across America. So what about right after all of that?
It really has been interesting. I've never had a day where I'm bored or anything like that, because I have the Chris Kyle Frog Foundation that I work on, and I've got a children's series coming out later this year. And then Jim and I have been working on American Spirit for a while, American Wife. We were approached for a TV limited series, right? So in that way, I've been doing a lot of work at home, and I'm mom first. I'm absorbed in kids' sports and activities and stuff. So I think in some ways it just feels like it hasn't been in some ways there's been a relief, right? Because we used to travel, my kids and I, with a teacher on the road. Yeah. And so we shifted to being home more. That's been a nice change, and I realize that the pace is a little bit slower, which is, I think it's good for all of us in that way, but it's a good constant busy still, if that makes sense.
So when you went back to that, when you moved back home, that might have been when you sort of had to start having this new normal of life without Chris at home.
Yeah, I think it is interesting because there's been a progression that I don't know that I could necessarily put into words. In some ways, I don't really have a concept of time. And some people told me that's the way it is with grief, that you just lose track of time. And I really have. I've never been great with time in the first place, but I have lost track of a lot of the time. I've just sort of healed in a way that is the best I could do. And sometimes people will remind me, yeah, but do you remember where you were 2 years ago? And I'll be like, and then they'll tell me, you were doing this, you were doing that. I'm like, wow, we really have come a long way. But I don't take note of it maybe as much as I could.
You have a section in the book called Moving Beyond Grief.
Right.
And grief is obviously such a personal experience for everyone, but you've connected with other people in order to kind of help others move beyond grief. What lessons have you learned about it, and what do you share in the book about that?
I think the biggest thing for me with grief is that it's such an individual process. You can hear therapists talk about these years and what it typically takes, or people can write books on grief, but I just find that it's such a personal experience because you may go through all stages at some point, but at different levels, so it's not predictable. And the biggest life lesson for me is, I don't think that God created this mess. I think somebody chose evil, and he sees you through it. That's my faith, and that's how that plays in. And I noticed that I'm a different person for having gone through it. It's the first time that I really couldn't plan it, right? I couldn't even attempt to plan it because grief has a way of surprising you constantly. One day you wake up and you're better. Or one day you wake up and you're worse than you were 6 months ago in a certain way. I think in that way it taught me to let go and just accept that I'm on a journey that I can't predict, and have faith that I've watched other people go through it and they are okay at some point. So it's really a lesson, and I think letting go and accepting that your experience is unique, it's individual, and it's probably not like anyone else's, even though they may have lost the same person as you.
This is Fox Extra. Hello to our fans watching in Canada. Thanks for watching Fox on Videotron. If you have a question or comment about one of our shows, email us, foxaroundtheworld@foxnews.com.
America is a special place. Every 4 years, we make a choice for ourselves, for our families, for our future. Democracy 2020. It's in your hands. Fox News. America is watching.
All right, the country morning tonight after NBA legend Kobe Bryant tragically dying in a helicopter crash yesterday. Trace Gallagher with those reports and those details. Trace, one of the best players ever.
Yeah, the NTSB talks about investigating man, machine, and environment. We know the helicopter had no prior incident, Sean. The pilot was reportedly experienced, but the fog was a major problem. Kobe Bryant, his 13-year-old daughter Gigi, and 7 others departed Orange County's John Wayne Airport and flew above Interstate 5. Then, before flying northwest over the 101 freeway, the pilot noted he was at 1,400 feet, requested permission to use special visual flight rules. That's where you fly without instruments when the cloud ceiling is below 1,000 feet. The pilot also asked for a flight following where controllers help you navigate. The last transmission from air traffic control told the pilot he was too low to be picked up on radar. The pilot likely never heard the final transmission, though at the end he did try to pull up, did not make it.
And police had grounded their helicopters that day. Sad, tragic. Thoughts and prayers with this family. We'll never be the media mob. We look for the truth. Let not your heart be troubled. Laura Ingram, big show. Laura.
Real news, real honest opinion, all in one place. Stay on top of the hottest trending stories here. This is Fox News Radio.
He did not commit an impeachable offense. I'm Dave Anthony, Fox News. That's President Trump's defense. And his legal team will wrap up their arguments today.
You cannot turn conduct that is not impeachable into impeachable conduct simply by using words like quid pro quo and personal benefit.
Alan Dershowitz also told senators at the trial John Bolton's reported allegation in an upcoming book is also not impeachable. That the president told him he initially held up military aid to Ukraine to get an investigation into Joe and Hunter Biden. Whether Bolton will testify remains a big issue. Fox's Rachel Sutherland live in Washington.
Dave, after the President's Council wraps up, there will be a question and answer period. And then by the end of the week, a battle over witnesses is expected. Republican Mitt Romney calling for former National Security Advisor John Bolton to testify. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
The president ordered everyone with firsthand knowledge of his actions not to testify in the impeachment inquiry. We're all staring a White House cover-up in the face.
Republican James Lankford said this morning that senators should be given access to the manuscript of Bolton's upcoming book, and he's calling it to speak publicly. Dave?
Rachel, Hong Kong's cutting rail service to mainland China as the coronavirus outbreak now infects more than 4,500 people, as 106 have died. The U.S. and other countries are planning to fly some citizens out of Wuhan, the sealed-off city at the epicenter. Investigators in California are looking at thick fog as a factor in the helicopter crash that killed former NBA star Kobe Bryant, his daughter, and 7 others on Sunday. The helicopter slammed into a hillside, so there's a lot of debris in the wreckage.
It's a very difficult task. It's going to take a while, so be patient.
Sheriff Alex Villanueva. In Scottsboro, Alabama, there was a vigil last night for the 8 people killed when a fire broke out on a dock in the Tennessee River. People living in boats were asleep. Some were able to escape jumping in the water. Others could not. A mother and her 4 kids were among the dead. 35 boats burned. America's listening to Fox News.
Bill Hemmer reports weekdays at 3 p.m. Eastern.
Moving to the town of Chaldea. These are complex times. They need to be understood in more than just a soundbite.
We're in central Hanoi, just a few blocks.
When people's lives are affected, it's important to be fast, but it's most important to be right.
Boston is a city in shock.
Information has never moved faster than it does today. It is our job to cut through it.
Bill Hemmer reports weekdays at 3 p.m. Eastern, only on the Fox News Channel.
America is a special place. It's a place where we fight for what we want and speak up for what we believe, where we have the power to change the course of our nation and the world. Every 4 years, we make a choice for ourselves, for our families, for our future. We do something most people across the globe only dream of. Democracy 2020. It's in your hands. Fox News. America is watching.
While President Trump's impeachment trial continues today in the Senate, he'll remain focused on his plan that the Palestinians want no part of for Middle East peace.
President Trump is set to unveil the long-delayed plan at noon today after unveiling it to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and blue and white leader Benny Gantz in separate meetings yesterday at the White House. The president expected to ask each of them to take immediate action on implementing it.
But this is a plan that's very important to peace in the Middle East. No matter where I went, they say Israel and the Palestinians, they have to make peace before you can really have peace in the Middle East.
The president said Monday that he thinks he will ultimately have the support of the Palestinians, who thus far have opposed the plan sight unseen, and that many Arab nations have agreed to it. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
Now, while he's in the U.S., Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has withdrawn a request to be immune from prosecution after he was indicted last year, accused of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. The withdrawal came hours before Israel's parliament, the Knesset, was set to begin considering that immunity request. In the search for 2 missing children in Idaho, a discovery: their parents.
Police in Kauai say they told Lori Vallow to produce physical evidence of her children to Idaho's Department of Health and Welfare within 5 days. Rexburg, Idaho police say 7-year-old Joshua and 17-year-old Tylee Ryan haven't been seen since September. And last month they said Vallow and her husband Chad Daybell, who's the kid's stepfather, had not been cooperative with their investigation. Police were called to do a welfare check on the kids in late November and were told Joshua was staying with a family friend in Arizona, but that was a lie. Both Chad and Lori's previous spouses died, and police have said it's possible the children's disappearance is somehow linked to the suspicious death of Chad's prior wife. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
The Wall Street stocks could rebound. Dow futures up more than 100 the day after a 454-point plunge. I'm Dave Anthony. This is Fox News.
The early hours of May 15th, 1918, Henry Johnson became a legend.
As many as 24 Germans attempting to capture Henry and Needham.
Henry fired back until his rifle was empty.
Henry jumped on top of this German, plunged a bolo knife through the top of his skull. Many considered Henry Johnson to be the greatest American hero of the war.
Carlson tonight. Guess what's still going on? You guessed it, the impeachment trial. It continues this hour. The president's legal team currently speaking. We'll dip in live if anything newsworthy happens. Think back to 2016 and the campaign then. Donald Trump used to recite a poem about a woman who took a dying snake into her house and nursed it back to health. The snake did become healthy and then immediately whipped around and bit the woman. As she breathed her last breaths, the woman asked the snake, "Why did you do this?" "Well, because I'm a snake," was the reply. "That's what we do." All of which somehow reminds us of disgraced former National Security Advisor John Bolton. Republicans in Washington tonight seem shocked to discover that Bolton has turned and betrayed his former boss, Donald Trump, but they shouldn't be shocked. That's who John Bolton is. That's who John Bolton has always been. That's what John Bolton does. And not to brag, we called it long ago. Yesterday, the New York Times reported that Bolton's new book contains sections designed to help the Democratic case for impeachment. Bolton accuses the president of delaying military aid to Ukraine in order to pressure its government into investigating Hunter Biden. Again, people in Washington seem stunned by this, or claim to be. If Bolton disliked Trump so much, they wonder, why did he join the administration? Well, the answer is simple. Bolton wanted war with Iran. He's always wanted war with Iran. He's obsessed with it. Here he is, for example, gleefully fantasizing about regime change there long before he became National Security Advisor. Watch.
I have said for over 10 years since coming to these events that the declared policy of the United States of America should be the overthrow of the mullahs regime in Tehran. And that's why before 2019, we here will celebrate in Tehran. Thank you very much.
In Tehran! But Iran wasn't Bolton's only target. He also wanted more war in Syria and war in Venezuela, too. He wanted the war in Afghanistan to continue until your great-grandchildren are too old to serve. And of course, like all neocons, he wanted war with Russia. Lots of it. In 2016, Bolton cited Russia as one of America's greatest threats. Can you imagine? But not China. For Bolton, every conflict was the final test of America's resolve and a chance to use overwhelming military force. Maybe because he never served in the military himself, Bolton genuinely, passionately loved war. In the end, of course, he didn't get it. Trump blocked him at the brink of more than one conflict. Bolton finally left in well-deserved humiliation. Bolton's resignation was one of the highlights of the president's first term, a day of celebration for normal people everywhere, but not in America's newsrooms. The media were sad to see John Bolton go. They love wars. Wars mean they get to move tanks around on a screen and talk about weapon systems. And so suddenly, for the first time, they love John Bolton. What a hero he was.
Bolton is something different. He's one of them. And he's not prone to just lying.
And you have to give him the benefit of the doubt on credibility because this president deserves zero.
It did feel like we were marking time and this was becoming a planned acquittal.
Right.
And yet we have a Perry Mason moment.
Who are you going to believe, Donald Trump or John Bolton? You could believe probably a dead frog more than you could believe Donald Trump at this point.
John Bolton is a lot of things, but able to be painted as a deep state actor is not one of them. So good luck with that. Republicans can now exhale and acknowledge that the earth is round, that Donald Trump is indeed corrupt. They can rely on a man who is the Republican version of Justice Scalia in foreign policy circles, a conservative's conservative.
A conservative's conservative, says a liberal. In fact, the only thing John Bolton helped conserve over the past 20 years is Raytheon's stock price. He did a good job there. The many pointless conflicts he's been pushing are not conservative. They're just the opposite of that. They're a big part of the reason our middle class is dying. That seems obvious to you. It's not obvious here. In Washington, counterproductive wars are a virtue, not a vice. Just ask Mitt Romney, one of their biggest champions. Over the last week in the Senate, Romney has made a ton of ambivalent noises about having relevant witnesses testify to the public. Hunter Biden, Adam Schiff, the whistleblower who shall not be named. I'm not sure. Not really necessary, says Mitt Romney. But John Bolton? Mitt Romney would love to see his old friend John Bolton testify before Congress. Keep in mind that Bolton was once a, quote, senior foreign policy advisor to Romney's doomed presidential campaign, and clearly they're still friends.
I think with the story that came out yesterday, it's increasingly apparent that it would be important to hear from John Bolton. It is pretty fair to say that John Bolton has a relevant testimony to provide to those of us who are sitting in impartial justice.
Will John Bolton testify? Who knows? Either way, it won't change the outcome. Trump will be acquitted. This is a totally stupid sideshow. We'll be embarrassed about it later. But it's worth taking this moment to pause and think about John Bolton himself for a moment anyway. How did a guy who disagrees so completely with everything that Donald Trump ran on and won on, how did that guy wind up in a position of power in the White House? Good question, because he's not the only one. Doug McGregor is a retired U.S. Army colonel, author of the book Margin of Victory, our first choice for foreign policy analysis. We're glad to see you tonight. Colonel McGregor, what do you make of John Bolton's turn?
Well, first of all, I'm impressed with Washington, D.C. There's no other place on the planet where a man who could not be confirmed for the job as ambassador to the UN suddenly overnight is transformed into the minister of truth and the paragon of virtue that everyone should listen to. So, no, this couldn't happen anywhere else but Washington, D.C. The second thing is what's really disturbing is something that you mentioned earlier. This is someone who probably is the most strident advocate for the use of American military power everywhere that we've ever had in the White House, certainly in the job as National Security Advisor. And this from a man who announced very glibly to the American public and numerous publications that, you know, gosh, I didn't see any point to serving in Vietnam because by the time I might have been over there, gosh, the war was probably over anyway, so I saw no point and found a place in the National Guard. So this is...
The irony coming from someone who has espoused keeping troops in places long beyond the possibility of victory.
Absolutely. And clearly he was fired principally, not just for the broader issues of Iran and Venezuela and Syria and so forth, but because specifically he spoke publicly and said that Libya could be a good model for North Korea at a point in time when the President of the United States was building a policy to defuse the conflict, the crisis, the war, end the war on the Korean Peninsula. That's the great tragedy. And finally, President Trump said that's enough.
I wonder, would any sane person say Libya, that went from a dictatorship, for sure, to a place of total chaos where there are slave markets in the capital? Would anyone look at Libya today and say, you know, we need more of those?
Well, probably Hillary Clinton, since she was the principal force behind it, but I'm sure that John Bolton would have been much happier with Hillary Clinton, certainly more satisfied with George Bush that he served than with Donald Trump. And here's the final tragedy. Everyone knows everyone knows that Mr. Bolton has strong views. No one questions that. Everyone knows his advocacy for wars in many places. And yet, somehow, magically, he got the job. And then managed to keep large numbers of people in the National Security Council staff who were all committed anti-Trumpers, and to bring in new anti-Trumpers like Elliot Abrams, Jeffries, and others in support of his policies of confrontation and hostility. He thought he was president. And that's ultimately what did him in.
It seems by his behavior that he was working to undermine the president while he was there. I mean, this doesn't seem a departure from what he's been doing for the last couple of years.
Oh, no, absolutely. And remember, he's very much in line with those 4 stars that brought the president over to the Pentagon, sat him down in the tank and said, we'll straighten him out. We'll explain to him why none of these wars can end, why we have to have troops everywhere. That's John Bolton. This town is full of people like John Bolton. The only difference is that Bolton didn't even bother to disguise it. He walked in, actively subverted, tried to replace Donald Trump's policies with his own. The tragedy is he was there so long and did so much damage.
There's so many people in this city who've made fortunes pushing these wars, and I really hope that we take time on this show to expose them, because they deserve to be exposed.
Absolutely.
You've made that point many times. Colonel, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
Congresswoman Debbie Lesko represents the state of Arizona. She's also a member of the President's Defense Team. We're happy to have her tonight. Congresswoman, thanks so much for coming on. What would you say, if you could boil down today to a theme for the President's Defense Team, what would it be?
Well, that the president did nothing wrong and there's nothing impeachable. The House didn't prove their case at all, and that the Senate should acquit him. I mean, I think that's the bottom line of everything. There is nothing impeachable, and all these calls for witnesses are just wrong, because the House could have called the witnesses themselves. They chose not to. They didn't subpoena John Bolton, and now they're claiming that they should talk to him. Well, they should have done their job in the House.
Mitt Romney, though, who's a Republican from a contiguous state, Utah, senator, is now saying that John Bolton should be a witness at the trial. What do you think of that? Why do you think Senator Romney would say that?
I think Mitt Romney has some sour grapes, quite frankly. I mean, I don't know him personally. I haven't talked to him recently, but that's my guess.
So you said the theme tonight, for the course of the day, was the president did nothing wrong and should be acquitted. But is that, would you say, an open question? I think the rest of us who are watching this are more likely not watching it with the assumption we know the ending, which is acquittal. Is that even in doubt?
I don't think it's in doubt, but I think it's wise for the president's legal team to prove their case. And they proved the case that the House had the burden of proof. They didn't even come close to proving any evidence of impeachable offense. That all it's been is a bunch of rhetoric, fluff, and really all it is by the Democrats, and it has been all of 2019, is to influence the 2020 election. That's what all this is about. It has nothing to do with the truth or anything else. It's about taking back the power.
Yeah, well, I think they're doing that. I mean, Bernie Sanders has been rising in the polls. That's not what they intended when they started this all. They intended to boost Joe Biden, but it hasn't helped him one little bit, which may be something that they regret in the end. Finally, do you think it wouldn't be interesting for the rest of us to hear from Hunter Biden?
Well, I think it's interesting to hear from Hunter Biden, but I don't think it needs to be done in an impeachment trial. I mean, I would advise against the senators voting for more witnesses, because that really just plays into the Democrats' hands. All they want to do is prolong this, and they want to muddy up the presidency. They've tried to do it for years now to impeach him, and that's what they want to do. This is their whole goal. Their whole goal is not about impeachment. They know that he's going to be acquitted. They're trying to influence the 2020 election. They're trying to drag this out as long as they can, and quite frankly, it wouldn't surprise me if the House does other articles of impeachment up until the election.
Yeah. I don't think it'll work, just my view. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on, John. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
We're going to continue to monitor the nonsense ongoing in the Senate. The president's legal team currently speaking. We'll take you there live as warranted. But first, a medical emergency. Well, the coronavirus, which is incubated in China for some unknown period of time and now has escaped China, is getting worse by the day. More than 80 people are dead so far. That's the official number. It could be vastly larger. Thousands of cases have been confirmed. At least 5 of them here in the United States. Again, this is an illness with an incubation period of 2 weeks, so there could be many, many more that we don't know about yet. But so far, and this is the fascinating part, travel to and from China and the United States remains completely unaffected. Chinese citizens, even people coming directly from Wuhan, the place where this started, can travel to and from the United States whenever they want. Bizarre. During the SARS epidemic 17 years ago, Canada failed to shut down flights between China and Toronto, and the result was a major outbreak that killed dozens. It was so bad that Singapore banned flights from Canada. Amazing. So are we risking something like that today? Dr. Mark Siegel is a Fox Medical contributor, and he joins us tonight. Doctor, thanks so much for coming on. You don't want to be alarmist about this, but it sounds pretty serious, and I'm kind of struck by the fact nobody seems to be, in public anyway, talking about a travel ban. Why?
You know, Tucker, I'll get to that, but I want to say that I've been studying contagions for a really long time, as you know, and I have never seen anything like this. The amount of suppression from the Chinese government. Now they're suddenly cordoning off whole cities. The fact that this far in, we don't know how contagious this is or even how deadly it is. The World Health Organization has yet to call this an international emergency when 1.5 billion people in China are already involved. And then to your point about the lack of a true travel ban and the idea that people are going back and forth semi-freely. And if you do quarantine entire cities, by the way, people try to escape the quarantine.
That's right.
And they get hysterical and they spread more virus. A shining light in the darkness is our own Centers of Disease Control here, which has looked at 110 cases already, found 5, all of whom traveled from Wuhan, and ruled out 32 cases, didn't have it. So they're teaching us as we go now how contagious this is. I'm very proud of our own government, CDC, not what's going on in China, which is really reckless and really, really scary.
Well, it is scary, and I mean, I guess the most obvious question is the Chinese government providing our Centers for Disease Control with all the information that it needs to make informed decisions?
I have reason to believe that that's still not true, and I'll tell you why. How the numbers are suddenly skyrocketing. And for months, there were word coming out of China that people were getting sick from a strange illness and people were dying. Are they really on all the death certificates, this virus? Do we really know all the people that had this, or did they think they had a flu? We don't know if this is more contagious or deadly than the flu, and we need to know that. We're studying these 5 people very, very carefully, but that's what should have been done in China from the beginning, and it wasn't. And I'm positive there's thousands and thousands and thousands of cases that never came to light here.
Well, so given that we know, and it's no surprise the Chinese government is lying about a matter of life and death, as they have so many times before, corporate America will whelp and whine if we shut down travel to and from China. But if you're acting in the public's best interest, wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, and yes, you would, and I want to make a point here that you know well. The State Department is saying level 3 to China, meaning you can go if you have an essential reason to go. But here's what our viewers need to know. You can get there, and it's also, according to the State Department, China can say, you can't go back. You can't leave. We're not letting you out. We're afraid you might have the Wuhan coronavirus. So I would tell everybody, unless they absolutely have to stay out of China. And I'm not trying to say, by the way, that all parts of China are equally affected here. That's not my point. But you could go there and they could decide, whoops, now you're in the area we're worried about, and not let you go home.
I mean, especially as you pointed out in the first sentence, we just don't know because it's an opaque dictatorship that lies for a living. Terrifying. Dr. Siegel, I know we'll see you again on this.
We need to know how contagious and how deadly.
Yes.
They're not telling us.
Amazing. Thank you, Doctor. Great to see you. We've got a Fox News alert for you. The president's legal team speaking at his impeachment trial at this hour on Capitol Hill. Alan Dershowitz is currently at the microphone. Minutes ago, he said this, quote, "I voted for Hillary Clinton, and I would have made the same argument for her that I'm currently making for President Trump." Let's listen in.
Justifying impeachment is the manner by which the word incapacity, focus on that word, please, incapacity, was treated. Madison and others focused heavily on the problem of what happens if a president becomes incapacitated. Certainly a president who's incapacitated should not be allowed to continue to preside over this great country. And everyone seemed to agree that the possibility of presidential incapacity is a good and powerful reason for having an impeachment provision. But when it came time to establishing criteria for actually removing a president, incapacity was not included. Why not? Presumably because it was too vague and subjective a term. And when we had an incapacitated president, in the end of the Woodrow Wilson second term, he was not impeached and removed. A constitutional amendment with carefully drawn procedural safeguards against abuse was required to remedy the daunting problem of a president who was deemed incapacitated. Now, another reason why incapacitation was not included among impeachable offenses because it's not criminal. It's not a crime to be incapacitated. It's not akin to treason. It's not akin to bribery. And it's not a high crime and misdemeanor. The framers believe that impeachable offenses must be criminal in nature and akin to the most serious crimes. Incapacity simply did not fit into this category. Nothing criminal about it. So the Constitution had to be amended to include a different category of non-criminal behavior that warranted removal. I urge you to consider seriously that important part of the history of the adoption of our Constitution. I think that Blackstone and Hamilton also support this view. There's no disagreement over the conclusion that the words treason, bribery, or other high crimes, those words require criminal behavior. The debate is only over the words and misdemeanors. The framers of the Constitution were fully cognizant of the fact that the word misdemeanor was a species of crime. The book that was most often deemed authoritative was written by Wilbur Blackstone in Great Britain. And here is what he says about this in the version that was available to the framers. A crime or misdemeanor is an act committed or omitted in violation of a public law, either forbidding or commanding it. The general definition comprehends both crimes and misdemeanors, which, properly speaking, are mere synonymous terms. Mere synonymous terms. He then went on, though in common usage the word crimes is made to denote such offenses are of a deeper and more outrageous dye, while small faults and omissions of less consequence are comprised under the gentler name of misdemeanors only. Interestingly, though, he pointed out that misdemeanors were not always so gentle. There was a category called capital misdemeanors, where if you stole somebody's pig or other fowl, you could be sentenced to death, but it's only for a misdemeanor, don't worry. It's not for a felony, but there were misdemeanors that were capital in nature. Moreover, Blackstone wrote that parliamentary impeachment, quote, is a prosecution of already known and established law presented to the most high and supreme court of criminal jurisdiction, analogous to this great court. He observed that a commoner can be impeached but only for high misdemeanors. A peer may be impeached for any crime, any crime. This certainly suggests that Blackstone deemed high misdemeanors to be a species of crime. Hamilton is a little less clear in this issue, and not surprisingly, because he was writing in Federalist number 65, he was writing not to define what the criteria for impeachment were. He was writing primarily in defense of the Constitution as written, and less to define its provisions. But he certainly cannot be cited in favor of criteria such as abuse of power or obstruction of Congress, nor of impeachment voted along party lines. He warned that the greatest danger, these were his words, the greatest danger is that the decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt.
Alan Dershowitz, formerly of Harvard Law School, continue to monitor the president's defense team this hour and bring you any key portions of it live as warranted. Of course, while official Washington has spent the last week breathlessly obsessing over a silly impeachment ritual, whose conclusion we already know, something actually newsworthy and remarkable really has happened in the rest of America. Bernie Sanders became the Democratic frontrunner. Bet you didn't think that was going to happen. He just had a heart attack. He's like 77. And yet, with 1 week to go before the Iowa caucuses, a newly released Emerson poll has Sanders up 9 points in the first contest of the nominating process. That's the biggest lead in Iowa for any candidate in the past 2.5 months. It's real. After Iowa, of course, is New Hampshire on February 11th. Now, new polling in that state shows Sanders up 7 points. And that's not an outlier poll. Sanders has led every poll in New Hampshire in the last 2 weeks by an average of 8 points. Now, historically, candidates who win the first 2 primaries become the party's presidential nominee. But wait, you can almost hear CNN saying, and they will, Iowa and New Hampshire are incorrigibly white states. They're not representative of the new Democratic Party. Okay. The third contest is in Nevada, now called Nevada, where the Democratic primary electorate is heavily Hispanic. So how's Bernie Sanders doing there? Well, he's risen to within a single point of Joe Biden, and he's still rising. So suddenly it's pretty clear, whether you like it or not, that the momentum is with Bernie Sanders. As of today, he could easily become the Democratic presidential nominee. And that's a very big deal, not least for the people who control the Democratic Party. Despite superficial similarities, Biden and Buttigieg, 2 other frontrunners, and really even Elizabeth Sanders, are not like Bernie Sanders. If Bernie Sanders wins, he won't just mandate gender-neutral bathrooms at the local Chick-fil-A or seize guns from mean old Republicans in rural America. Those are lifestyle issues, and they're beloved by the Democratic donor class because they don't cost them anything. They are free, and they get to feel virtuous. But Bernie doesn't plan to stop there. He's got bigger ideas. He intends to upend America's economic order. That's bad news for a lot of us. But it's especially bad news for the liberal finance establishment and the tech world, which have become richer than any group in history over the past 20 years. Democratic donors hate and fear Bernie Sanders for that. So they put up their PR department to attack him. First, CNN, head of the PR department of the liberal establishment, teamed up with the Warren campaign to denounce Sanders as sexist. They based this on a single unprovable allegation from a year-old private conversation. If anything, that attempt was counterproductive. It was too obvious and dumb and ham-handed, like everything they do. But they've kept trying. A headline in the Daily Beast this morning really sums it up. Quote, worried Democratic operatives scramble to fund a network to take down Bernie Sanders. Well, if you lived through the 2016 campaign, that may sound a little familiar to you. Bill Kristol tried the same thing in the Republican primaries 4 years ago. How'd that work? Well, Donald Trump is now the president. Lesson? It isn't easy for bitter establishment dinosaurs to crush a political insurgency. And you'd think the ruling class would have learned that very simple lesson the last time they tried it, on the Republican side. But no, they haven't learned it. Now they're attacking broadcaster Joe Rogan. Why? For the crime of giving Sanders a half-hearted endorsement. Now, Rogan, who hosts one of the most popular podcasts in America, infuriated the establishment and the New York Times by saying this on his show last week.
I think I'll probably vote for Bernie. But him as a human being, when I was hanging out with him, and I believe in him. I like him a lot. He's been insanely consistent his entire life. He's basically been saying the same thing, been